Have you ever felt like you weren't alone, even when it seemed like you were? Airbnb rentals can hold secrets no one talks about, and some presences that defy logic. Today, I'm going to share 3 chilling stories from guests who experienced real terror in places that promised comfort but delivered nightmares. Get ready to feel fear knocking at your door, with nowhere left to run. History 1. It was close to midnight when I decided to stop by Walmart. I thought it would be a good idea to avoid the usual crowds and rush of daytime hours. I just wanted to get in, pick up a few essentials, and be out as quickly as possible. The parking lot was almost empty, and the usual noise of bustling shoppers was replaced by a thick silence that seemed to press down on me as I got out of my car. The glow of the street lamps and the fluorescent light spilling out from the automatic doors gave the building an eerie, almost unnatural look. I told myself to calm down. It was just another night, and I was perfectly safe. But deep inside, I couldn't shake a subtle feeling of unease. As I pushed my cart through the sliding doors and into the store, the usual background hum of fluorescent lights and chatter was muted, almost like the whole place was holding its breath. The air inside felt colder and heavier than normal. In the night, vast aisles, usually crowded with shoppers and filled with chatter, were nearly empty. I could hear my footsteps softly echoing on the polished floor, the sound feeling alien in such silence. The shelves loomed like tall walls on either side, casting long shadows that seemed to move in the corners of my vision. At first I tried to focus on my list, on the mundane task ahead, but the silence around me began to feel oppressive. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnatural, like a vacuum of sound. As I moved deeper into the store, something subtle but unmistakable caught my attention. Faint whispers drifted on the edges of my hearing, almost imperceptible at first. It was as if someone or something was speaking just out of reach, words broken and incoherent, like fragments of forgotten secrets carried on a breeze. I stopped and tried to listen closely, but the voices were tangled and unclear, impossible to understand. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the store's ventilation system was creating strange noises, or maybe my mind was playing tricks in the quiet. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew slightly louder, more urgent, layering over each other in a way that felt deliberate. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and an icy chill snaked down my spine. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the aisles were empty. The shadows between the shelves seemed to flicker and dance, just beyond the edge of my vision. Every step I took felt like it was being mirrored by some unseen presence trailing me. The feeling of being watched morphed into something darker, an invisible follower, a silent predator. Trying to steady my nerves, I quickened my pace, weaving through aisles with no real destination other than to get closer to the front of the store. The whispers became a low murmur, overlapping voices without clear meaning. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just sounds bouncing oddly in the empty space, but the sense of dread only grew. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered irregularly, casting sudden pockets of darkness that swallowed parts of the aisle. Shadows stretched and twisted, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for me. The air felt heavy, like it was thickening, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I could hear footsteps echoing somewhere behind me, slow, deliberate steps, but whenever I looked back, the aisle was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing shallow and quick. The cold sensation of something brushing past my arm made my skin crawl. I gripped the cart tightly, feeling more like a shield than a shopping aid. The store that was supposed to be a simple place of errands had become a maze of fear and confusion, alive with unseen forces that toyed with my mind. Moving past the electronics section, a shadow flickered in the corner of my eye, darting between shelves. My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of nausea hit me. The coldness in the air intensified, spreading like frost along my skin. The whispers swelled into a chant, barely audible but unmistakably sinister, echoing around me. Panic surged through my body, urging me to run, but the aisles seemed endless, folding back on themselves in impossible ways. I was trapped in a labyrinth designed to confuse and terrorize. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, then dimmed, plunging the store into a twilight gloom. My heart raced as I spun around, desperate to find a way out. The shadows writhed on the walls like living things, and the chanting voices grew louder, resonating in my ears. I was no longer alone. Something ancient and malevolent filled the space around me, feeding on my fear. Time lost all meaning as I staggered through the endless aisles. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts scattered. The store, once a mundane place, was now a nightmare, a prison that breathed and watched. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, but I was caught in its cold grip. The whispers promised doom, a fate sealed in darkness and silence. I felt utterly helpless, swallowed by the cold embrace of the unseen presence. My mind reeled, wondering if anyone would ever find me or hear my screams. The world outside seemed distant and unreachable, as if I had been swallowed by the night itself. And then, somewhere deep within the shadows, I realized I wasn't just a visitor. I was prey. The Walmart at midnight was no ordinary store. It was a gateway to a nightmare where fear ruled, and escape was a distant hope. History 2. It was late, far later than I had anticipated when I first decided to visit the Walmart that night. After the eerie experience wandering the nearly empty aisles and hearing those distant whispers, I knew that what was happening was far beyond any normal explanation. The store no longer felt like a place to buy groceries or household goods. It had become something else entirely, a living, breathing entity with secrets buried deep within its walls, secrets darker than anything I had ever imagined. I needed to understand what I had gotten myself into before it was too late. As I stood there, the harsh fluorescent lights above flickering sporadically, my mind raced back to the strange noises and shadowy movements I'd seen. The whispers weren't just random sounds. They felt purposeful, almost like a message from something or someone trapped inside this labyrinth of shelves and corridors. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more the fear settled deep into my bones. I was convinced now that something malevolent was stalking me through the aisles, following my every step. Desperate for answers, I pulled out my phone and began searching for any history or stories related to this particular Walmart. To my horror, I stumbled across obscure online forums and local legends hinting at a dark past connected to the building. Years ago, this very store was the site of strange disappearances and unexplained events that locals refused to talk about openly. There were rumors about a shadowy presence that preyed on late-night shoppers, trapping them inside and feeding off their fear. My stomach churned as I read about others who had ventured here after dark and never returned, or had returned. Changed, broken, haunted. The air around me grew colder, heavier, as if the store itself was reacting to my discovery. The faint echo of footsteps, barely audible but unmistakably close, sent a jolt through my body. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing but empty aisles stretching into darkness. Shadows gathered in the corners of my vision, writhing like smoke, slipping just out of reach whenever I tried to look directly at them. A sudden noise made me jump, a metallic clang somewhere to my left. I moved cautiously toward the sound, my senses hyper-alert. The store felt alive, every creak and murmur magnified in the oppressive silence. As I rounded a corner, I glimpsed a figure at the edge of my sight, dark, indistinct, flickering like a flame about to be extinguished. My breath caught in my throat as the figure vanished before I could focus on it. Panic surged through me. The store, once so familiar, had become a maze designed to trap and confuse. The aisles twisted impossibly, leading me in circles. The exit seemed farther away with each passing minute. The whispers escalated into a chorus of ghostly voices, calling out in unintelligible tongues, weaving through the air like a sinister symphony. My hands trembled as I clutched my cart, now useless as a shield against the unseen horrors around me. I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot, heavy and unresponsive. The walls seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights flickering more violently, casting jagged shadows that clawed at me. I stumbled into the electronics section again, and there I saw it, an old security monitor flickering with static, but on the screen, shapes moved against the grainy black and white footage. Shadows darted between aisles that were empty in reality. One frame caught a pale, featureless face staring directly into the camera. I blinked, and it was gone. A cold breath brushed past my neck. I whirled around, but there was no one there. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, swirling around me like a cyclone of despair and dread. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. I realized then that the Walmart wasn't just a store anymore. It was a prison, a trap, a place where the forgotten and the damned lingered. The malevolent presence was not just watching me, it was hunting me, drawing strength from my fear, feeding off my desperation. The night stretched endlessly before me, an eternal maze of shadow and sound, and I knew the only way out was to face whatever haunted those aisles and break free from the nightmare that had swallowed me whole. History 3. I had no idea how long I'd been wandering those endless aisles when it happened. The lights overhead began to flicker, casting the entire store into a chaotic dance of shadows and brief illuminations. Each time the fluorescent bulbs died out, the darkness pressed in tighter, swallowing the colors and shapes around me, until all that remained were vague silhouettes and shifting forms. The hum of the electronics and the occasional mechanical buzz that had been background noise all night faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the faint whispering I couldn't escape. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as my eyes darted nervously, trying to find some anchor of reality in the surreal scene unfolding. Suddenly, the shelves nearby began to tremble, first subtly, as if a heavy truck rumbled past outside, but soon, the movement intensified. Boxes rattled, cans clinked, and plastic packages shifted with a sinister rhythm. I froze, heart leaping into my throat, staring in disbelief as an entire row of shelves slowly, impossibly, slid sideways. A gaping dark space yawned where the products once stood, revealing an unlit corridor I hadn't noticed before, a black hole amid the fluorescent glow. My breath hitched. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor, as if the very tiles beneath me had become adhesive, trapping me in place. The air grew colder, damp, carrying a scent like wet earth mixed with something metallic and old. The whispered voices swelled around me, overlapping in a chaotic chorus of indecipherable syllables that made my skin crawl. The shadows pooled at the end of the newly revealed corridor, and I felt eyes, dozens of unseen eyes, piercing through the gloom, watching, waiting. I couldn't tell if what I was seeing was real or some hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. The store was no longer a place of commerce, but a maze alive with something malicious, its corridors shifting like the inside of a nightmare. I felt utterly alone, completely exposed in this vast labyrinth that seemed intent on trapping me forever. I stumbled backward as the shelves creaked and groaned, moving again, this time to block off the path I had taken moments before. A low, guttural sound reverberated from the walls like a growl or a moan escaping from the depths of the building itself. Panic surged through me, raw and unforgiving. I dropped my shopping cart, its wheels clattering against the floor, and darted toward the entrance, desperate for escape. But the lights flickered out completely then, plunging me into darkness so complete it was as if the world had been swallowed, whole. The whispering turned to shouting, dissonant and anguished, echoing off the empty walls. My hands fumbled in the dark, searching blindly for anything, an exit, a handle, a lifeline. I could hear something moving nearby, slow, deliberate footsteps that weren't mine, growing louder, closer. I could feel breath against my skin, cold and foul, like the exhalation of death. I screamed, the sound strangled in my throat as I spun around, desperately clawing at the air. The darkness seemed to thicken, wrapping around me like a shroud. A shadow materialized before me, tall and shifting, its form impossible to define. It reached out, long, slender fingers brushing my cheek with a touch colder than ice. Then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, the lights returned, harsh and blinding. I was alone again, panting and trembling, heart racing uncontrollably. The shelves were still, the products perfectly in place. The store was silent save for the distant hum of a register somewhere far away. But I knew better. I knew the nightmare wasn't over. Something in that store had been awakened. Something ancient and hungry. And it wasn't done with May yet.